Have you ever looked at a family and thought, they have it all? The loving parents, the adorable children, the life that seems plucked right out of a storybook. But what if, behind closed doors, that picture-perfect family hid a secret so dark, it would shatter everything you thought you knew about them? What if the very foundation of their seemingly perfect life was built on lies, betrayal, and tragedy? Marcus Rayner, 34, and Janelle Washington, 32, were the kind of couple that made others believe in love. Living in a quiet neighborhood in Houston, Texas, their life seemed idyllic. Marcus was a charismatic husband and father, a man who prided himself on providing for his family. Janelle, a successful physical therapist, was not only the cornerstone of her home but a rising star in her career. Together they were raising two beautiful children, a bubbly 4-year-old boy and a precocious 6-year-old girl, with a third child on the way. To the outside world, they were the definition of the American dream. Neighbors would often see the family laughing on their porch, playing games in the front yard, or hosting backyard barbecues. Janelle, radiant and pregnant, was the picture of joy. Marcus, always attentive, seemed the doting husband. Their home, nestled on a serene street lined with oak trees, was filled with warmth and laughter. But what no one knew, what no one could have imagined, was that beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect life, a storm was brewing. A storm that would leave one person dead, another behind bars, and an entire family forever shattered. What led Marcus Rayner, the man everyone admired, to strangle the woman he vowed to love and protect? What secrets did their marriage hold, and how did it come to such a horrific and tragic end? Was it jealousy, betrayal, or something even darker? In the days leading up to Janelle's death, subtle cracks began to appear in their carefully curated life. Small arguments grew into explosive fights. Marcus became withdrawn and secretive, and Janelle confided in her sister that she feared for her safety. But even she couldn't predict what would happen next. The morning of her death, Marcus called 911 with a chilling calmness, claiming Janelle had overdosed on her medications. To some, his voice sounded grief-stricken, but to those who knew him well, there was something off, something rehearsed. When the police arrived, Marcus's story seemed plausible at first. But it wasn't long before investigators began uncovering inconsistencies, and what they discovered would unravel a horrifying truth that Marcus had desperately tried to bury. This is the story of how a family that seemed perfect on the outside became the center of one of Houston's most shocking crimes. It's a tale of love turned toxic, secrets that festered, and a plan that went devastatingly wrong. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of this tragic case, starting with the rise of the Rayner family and the unraveling of the lies that led to murder. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you find true crime as fascinating and thought-provoking as we do, consider subscribing to our channel. Here, we explore stories like this, stories that uncover the hidden truths behind seemingly perfect lives. Hit the subscribe button and join us as we unravel more mysteries, one case at a time. Now let's get back to the story. Marcus Rayner was the kind of man who knew how to win people over. Friends described him as charming, a man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the center of his attention. But beneath that magnetic exterior was a man who struggled with a sense of inadequacy that he worked hard to keep hidden. Marcus had always carried the weight of financial instability, often finding himself bouncing from one job to another, unable to secure the kind of stability he believed a man should provide for his family. This growing insecurity only deepened as his wife, Janelle Washington, began to thrive in her career. Janelle was driven, hard-working, and focused, a rising star in her field of physical therapy. Patients adored her, colleagues respected her, and she had recently been promoted to a senior role, bringing in more money than Marcus could ever hope to match. While Janelle celebrated her accomplishments with pride, Marcus quietly seethed, feeling the sting of being outshone by his wife. At first, Marcus masked his jealousy with pride, praising Janelle's success to friends and family. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Marcus began to grow resentful, accusing Janelle of spending more time at work than at home, of prioritizing her career over their family. What started as small, snide comments about her late hours soon escalated into heated arguments. Marcus's charm began to erode in the privacy of their home, revealing a man who was not only jealous but controlling. Janelle, for her part, tried to keep the peace. She loved Marcus and wanted their marriage to work, especially for the sake of their children. But as the tension between them grew, so did her doubts. She started confiding in her sister, expressing concerns about Marcus's temper and his increasing demands on her time. Janelle's sister urged her to take a step back and assess the toll the relationship was taking on her, but Janelle wasn't ready to give up. She was hopeful that things could return to how they were when they first met. Their relationship had not always been fraught with tension. In the early days, Marcus and Janelle had been inseparable. They met through mutual friends at a barbecue and hit it off instantly. Marcus, with his easy smile and quick wit, was everything Janelle thought she wanted in a partner. They married quickly, and for a while, life seemed perfect. But as the years went by and the responsibilities of parenthood and careers mounted, the cracks in their relationship began to show. Marcus, who had once been confident and supportive, became bitter and insecure. He started keeping tabs on Janelle, questioning her every move. If she was late coming home, Marcus assumed the worst. If she spent time with friends or family, he accused her of neglecting their marriage. What Janelle saw as innocent and necessary parts of her life, Marcus viewed as betrayals. It was a dynamic that wore Janelle down. She began to feel as though she was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to appease Marcus while juggling the demands of her growing career and her responsibilities as a mother. And though she didn't speak of it often, there was a quiet fear that began to creep into her heart. A fear that Marcus's temper might one day cross a line she couldn't ignore. Despite her growing unease, Janelle tried to hold on to the belief that things could get better. She convinced herself that Marcus's behavior stemmed from stress, that it wasn't who he truly was. But as her career continued to flourish and Marcus's resentment grew, it became clear that their marriage was heading down a path neither of them could fully control. A path that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As the months passed, the cracks in Marcus and Janelle's marriage widened. What had once been occasional disagreements turned into relentless arguments that seemed to leave them both more bitter and distant. Janelle, who had always been diligent about managing their finances, began noticing discrepancies in their accounts. Money was disappearing, and when she confronted Marcus, his answers were evasive. He claimed he was using the money to invest in opportunities that would eventually benefit the family, but he could never provide specifics. The more Janelle pressed him, the more defensive he became. It wasn't long before Janelle started suspecting that Marcus wasn't being truthful. She wondered if he was hiding something, maybe debts he hadn't told her about, or worse, something that could put their family in jeopardy. The tension reached a boiling point one evening when Janelle found a bank statement tucked away in Marcus's briefcase. It revealed withdrawals and expenses she didn't recognize. When she confronted him, Marcus exploded. He accused her of invading his privacy and undermining his role as the head of the household. For the first time, Janelle saw a side of Marcus she hadn't fully understood before. A man whose pride had been wounded to the point of rage. But Marcus's behavior didn't stop there. As his resentment festered, so did his paranoia. He began accusing Janelle of infidelity, despite having no evidence to support his claims. If she stayed late at work, he questioned where she had really been. If her phone buzzed with a notification, he demanded to know who was messaging her. Janelle tried to reassure him, but it was no use. Marcus's suspicions had taken root, and nothing she said or did could convince him otherwise. The arguments became a regular occurrence. Marcus would pace the living room, his voice rising as he hurled baseless accusations. Janelle, exhausted from trying to juggle her demanding job, her children, and now her increasingly volatile marriage, found herself retreating emotionally. She stopped engaging in the fights, hoping her silence would calm him. But it only seemed to infuriate Marcus more. Their children, too young to fully understand, began to notice the shift in the atmosphere. The laughter that once filled their home had been replaced by cold silences and muffled voices behind closed doors. Janelle worried about the impact this tension was having on them, but she didn't know how to fix it. The man she had once trusted with her heart was becoming a stranger, someone she didn't recognize, and worse, someone she was beginning to fear. In moments of reflection, Janelle confided in her sister. She admitted that she didn't know how much longer she could live like this. Marcus's behavior was draining her, and she felt as though she was constantly being punished for her success. Her sister urged her to consider taking a break from the marriage, even if just to give herself and the kids some space. But Janelle hesitated. She didn't want to break up her family, and part of her still believed that Marcus could change. Marcus, meanwhile, had begun to spiral. His insecurities and frustrations consumed him, and his thoughts grew darker with each passing day. He saw Janelle's independence not as a strength, but as a threat. In his mind, she was slipping away from him, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing control. It was this toxic combination of jealousy, pride, and paranoia that set the stage for what would come next, a moment of unimaginable violence that would forever change their lives. The breaking point came one quiet afternoon when Marcus stumbled upon something he was never meant to see. Janelle, in her growing desperation, had begun taking steps to protect herself and her children. She had consulted a lawyer, exploring the possibility of filing for divorce. But more than that, she intended to seek full custody of their children, a decision she knew would devastate Marcus. Marcus discovered her plans by accident. A legal consultation receipt tucked into a folder in their home office caught his eye. His heart sank as he read the details, each word fueling a storm of rage and betrayal. In his mind, this wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. It was about losing everything. The children he adored, the family he had worked so hard to build, the control he thought he had. It was all slipping through his fingers. From that moment, Marcus's thoughts began to spiral. He saw Janelle's actions not as a desperate attempt to protect herself and their children, but as an attack on him. To Marcus, this wasn't just a divorce. It was a declaration of war. And in his mind, he couldn't lose. At the same time, Marcus had begun to form a plan of his own. He had been quietly researching job opportunities in Atlanta, a city where he believed he could make a fresh start. Away from the judgment of their community, away from the shadow of Janelle's success, Marcus envisioned a life where he could take his children and begin again, free from the resentment and insecurities that had consumed him. But Atlanta wasn't just a plan for reinvention. For Marcus, it became a lifeline. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that leaving Houston was the only way to reclaim control over his life. He believed that if he could just take the children and leave, everything would somehow fall into place. There was just one obstacle standing in his way: Janelle. Marcus knew she would never agree to his plan, especially not after learning of her intention to seek full custody. And so, in the depths of his paranoia and desperation, he began to view her not as his partner or the mother of his children, but as an adversary who needed to be stopped. It was a dangerous combination: Marcus's mounting fears, his growing resentment, and his unwillingness to let go of control. The stage was set for a confrontation that would leave no winners, only heartbreak and devastation. Marcus's mind was racing, and the thoughts swirling within him were darker than ever before. He couldn't see a way out, and in his desperation, he decided there was only one solution. What happened next would change the lives of everyone involved forever. The night before the tragedy unfolded, the tension in the Rayner household reached an unbearable peak. Marcus and Janelle's argument echoed through the walls, loud enough for the neighbors to take notice. It was the kind of fight that made people uneasy, the kind that hinted at something far more serious than the usual marital disagreements. "You're trying to take everything from me," Marcus shouted, his voice trembling with anger. Janelle, exhausted and resolute, refused to back down. "I'm doing what's best for me and the kids, Marcus. You've left me no choice." Her calm demeanor only seemed to enrage him further. He accused her of turning their children against him, of plotting to ruin his life. As the argument escalated, Marcus's voice carried a dangerous edge. He threatened her, his words filled with venom, but Janelle didn't flinch. She dismissed his threats, telling him he needed to face reality. The argument ended with Marcus storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Janelle, though shaken, tried to focus on what mattered most: her children. She tucked them into bed, kissed them goodnight, and prayed that somehow things would get better. But deep down, she knew the situation was teetering on the edge of disaster. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. The neighborhood, still shrouded in the soft light of dawn, was just beginning to stir. Inside the Rayner home, Janelle was in the bedroom preparing for the day. She had plans to meet with her lawyer later that week, a meeting she hoped would bring her one step closer to freedom. But Marcus had other plans. He entered the bedroom, his face a mask of anger and desperation. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and tense. Janelle barely looked up. "Marcus, I've already said everything I need to say. This isn't working anymore." But Marcus wasn't interested in her reasoning. He stepped closer, his tone turning accusatory. "You think you can just walk away? Take my kids, ruin my life? I won't let you do this to me." Janelle finally met his gaze, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not doing anything to you, Marcus. This is about what's best for me and the children. I can't keep living like this." Her words were like a match to gasoline. Marcus's frustration, his fear of losing everything, boiled over into a blinding rage. "You don't get to decide that," he shouted, his voice breaking. "You're not taking them from me." Before Janelle could respond, Marcus lunged. The argument spiraled into something far more dangerous as he grabbed her by the throat. Janelle fought back, but Marcus's strength, fueled by his fury, was overwhelming. In those moments, years of resentment and anger came crashing down, and Marcus crossed a line he could never return from. When it was over, Janelle lay lifeless on the bedroom floor. Marcus stood over her, breathing heavily, his mind racing. The enormity of what he had done began to sink in, but instead of remorse, his thoughts turned to self-preservation. The children, still in the house, were unaware of what had just happened. They were still asleep, blissfully ignorant of the tragedy that had unfolded just down the hall. Marcus knew he needed to act quickly. He began crafting a story, one that he believed would protect him from the consequences of his actions. What he didn't realize was that the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, always finds a way to surface. Alicia Washington, Janelle's sister, arrived at the Rayner home shortly after Marcus called to deliver the devastating news. His voice on the phone had been unsettlingly calm, almost detached, as he explained that Janelle had passed away unexpectedly. Alicia had rushed over, her heart heavy with grief and confusion. But as soon as she walked through the door, something felt off. Marcus greeted her with an air of composed sorrow, but his words seemed rehearsed. "She took some pills," he said quietly. "I found her this morning, unresponsive." Alicia's eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene. The children sat quietly in the living room, their wide, innocent eyes filled with confusion. Marcus stood in the doorway of the bedroom, blocking her view of the space where Janelle had died. Alarm bells began to ring in Alicia's mind. She pushed past him and entered the room, her heart sinking as she saw Janelle's lifeless body. It didn't add up. Alicia had known Janelle her entire life. Her sister was not the type to misuse medication. And as she took in the sight of Janelle's neck, she noticed faint bruising, barely visible but impossible to ignore. It was then that Alicia knew something was very, very wrong. Fighting back tears, she stepped out of the room and called 911, insisting that the police come immediately. When the officers arrived, Marcus repeated his story. He told them he had found Janelle in bed, unresponsive, and assumed she had overdosed on sleeping pills. But the officers were trained to spot inconsistencies, and from the very beginning, Marcus's demeanor raised questions. His calmness, the lack of visible grief, and his reluctance to let anyone near Janelle's body all stood out. During their initial inspection, the officers noted the bruising on Janelle's neck. It was subtle, but it didn't align with Marcus's account of an overdose. The officers reported their findings and ordered an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Marcus's story was already beginning to unravel. Days later, the autopsy results came in, and they confirmed what Alicia had suspected all along. Janelle had not died from an overdose. She had been strangled. The medical examiner's report detailed clear signs of manual strangulation, evidence that could not be ignored. Armed with this new information, detectives brought Marcus in for further questioning. When confronted with the autopsy results, Marcus doubled down on his story. He claimed he had no idea how Janelle had died and insisted that he had nothing to do with it. But the detectives weren't convinced. They began to dig deeper into Marcus's recent behavior, searching for anything that might explain his actions. What they found painted a damning picture. Bank records revealed that Marcus had recently withdrawn a large sum of money and had begun making inquiries about housing in Atlanta. Further investigation uncovered searches on his computer for one-way flights out of Houston, all for himself and the children. It was clear that Marcus had been planning to leave, and Janelle's sudden death now seemed far from coincidental. As detectives spoke with Janelle's co-workers and friends, more pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Several of Janelle's colleagues revealed that she had expressed fear of Marcus in the weeks leading up to her death. Text messages and emails detailed her concerns about his growing temper and controlling behavior. Janelle had even mentioned feeling as though Marcus was watching her every move. It was becoming clear that Marcus's carefully crafted story was a lie. Detectives pieced together a timeline of events, building a case that pointed squarely to him as the perpetrator. With mounting evidence and no plausible explanation from Marcus, they secured a warrant for his arrest. When the day came, officers arrived at Marcus's home to take him into custody. He maintained his innocence, calmly insisting that he had nothing to hide. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marcus's composed facade began to crack. The man who had spent years controlling every aspect of his life now found himself powerless, facing the weight of his actions. The investigation had reached its turning point, and Marcus Rayner would now have to answer for the crime that shattered his family and shook an entire community. When news of Marcus Rayner's arrest reached the family, it sent shockwaves through their tight-knit circle. Alicia, who had been the first to suspect something was wrong, was devastated but not surprised. She had seen the signs, heard Janelle's fears, and now had to grapple with the heartbreaking reality that her sister's life had been cut short by someone who was supposed to love and protect her. Janelle's parents, heartbroken and struggling to comprehend the enormity of the loss, described her as a beacon of light in their family. Her father recounted how proud he was of Janelle's accomplishments, from her career as a physical therapist to her dedication as a mother. Her mother tearfully remembered the little girl who used to dream big and work even harder to make those dreams come true. Friends and colleagues echoed these sentiments, painting a picture of a woman who was not only successful, but deeply compassionate. Janelle had a way of making everyone feel seen and valued. She was the type of person who remembered birthdays, lent a helping hand when someone was in need, and lit up any room she walked into. The thought of her being gone, and the circumstances of her death, left an indelible mark on everyone who knew her. As Marcus sat in the interrogation room, his once confident demeanor began to crumble. The weight of the evidence against him, combined with the pressure of questioning, eventually broke through the facade he had so carefully maintained. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Marcus confessed, his voice shaking. He blamed the mounting financial stress, his feelings of inadequacy, and what he described as a marriage that had become impossible to fix. He spoke of feeling trapped, of believing that Janelle was trying to take everything from him. But his most chilling admission came when he described the morning of the crime. "She said she was leaving," he said quietly, staring down at his hands. "I just lost it. I didn't plan it. It just happened." He framed his actions as a moment of rage, a snap decision fueled by frustration and fear. But the detectives weren't swayed. They reminded Marcus of the planning, the money withdrawals, the research into moving to Atlanta, the attempt to fabricate a story about an overdose. This wasn't an impulsive act, they argued. It was the culmination of weeks, perhaps months, of calculated decisions. Marcus had no response. He simply sat in silence, his head in his hands, as the gravity of what he had done finally seemed to sink in. The closing chapter of this tragic story saw Marcus escorted into the courtroom, his hands cuffed, his face expressionless. Alicia, now the guardian of Janelle's children, sat in the gallery, holding back tears as she tried to be strong for them. The children, too young to understand the full scope of what had happened, were now living with their aunt, adjusting to a new reality without their mother. As the legal proceedings began, the Houston skyline stood in stark contrast to the broken lives left in the wake of Marcus's actions. What had once been a thriving family was now a story of loss and devastation, a grim reminder of how unchecked emotions and poor decisions can unravel everything. And so the story ends where it began, with a family that seemed perfect from the outside but hid a darkness that no one could have imagined. A family torn apart by jealousy, resentment, and a single act of violence that changed everything. Marcus Rayner's choices led to unimaginable heartbreak, leaving a void that could never truly be filled. It was a tragedy that would echo for years to come, a cautionary tale of love turned to anger, and a reminder that some choices can never be undone. Marcus Rayner was ultimately charged with capital murder, a charge that carried the weight of his actions and the devastation he had caused. The legal system would now decide his fate, but for those left behind, no verdict could undo the pain or bring Janelle back. Her children, now in the care of their Aunt Alicia, would grow up without their mother and with the knowledge that their father was responsible for her death. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder of how unchecked emotions, unaddressed insecurities, and mounting pressures can lead to catastrophic consequences. Marcus's inability to confront his own fears and feelings of inadequacy turned his love for Janelle into resentment, and ultimately into a moment of irreversible violence. It raises a haunting question: how many families are silently struggling under the weight of similar tensions? How often do we overlook the warning signs of a relationship on the verge of collapse, dismissing them as normal disagreements or temporary stressors? And more importantly, what can we do to recognize and address these hidden dangers before they spiral out of control? This case forces us to reflect on the pressures of modern family life, financial struggles, shifting power dynamics, and the fear of failure, and how they can ignite a dangerous storm when left unchecked. It's a chilling reminder that what we see on the surface doesn't always reflect the truth beneath. As we close this story, we encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think could have been done differently? What warning signs stood out to you? Let's keep this conversation going, because discussing these issues might just help prevent another tragedy like this one. If you found this story compelling, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more in-depth stories about crime, human behavior, and the dark secrets that often hide in plain sight. Together, we can explore these stories and the lessons they leave behind. Thank you for watching.